Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast where people leaders share their side of the story. We talk about the challenges they're facing, how they're addressing them, and what changes they hope to see as the workplace evolves. This podcast is sponsored by All Voices, the all-in-one employee relations platform. Hello and welcome to HR Voices. I am your host, Rebecca Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with Dayna Bailey, Enterprise HR Leader at Sofidel America Corp. Dayna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm excited too. I think I know I loved our pre-prep conversation just to kind of circle around our strategy for this conversation. And I just think you've got a really cool perspective that I'm excited for everybody to kind of hear as we walk through this specific scenario. And for anybody who's new here, HR Voices is a podcast that explores real and fabricated, anonymized employee relations scenarios through the lens of experienced HR and people leaders. So we're going to evaluate realistic workplace situations, and we're going to demonstrate how we'll assess risk, apply judgment, and design practical responses. So our goal here is to really kind of share how strong HR leaders think when they're facing ambiguity. So we're not necessarily looking for a single correct answer, because as we know in HR, that rarely exists. So we're really here to kind of just talk through what are the factors we have to consider when we're faced with something like this, and hopefully, share a little bit more about how we make judgments and decide what the next moves are from there. So Dayna, you ready for our scenario?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay. So we picked this scenario. Sometimes we'll do one from the headlines. Sometimes we'll do one that's fabricated. So this is a fabricated scenario, and we're calling it the compassionate termination. So a longtime, well-liked office manager has been with the company for 22 years. Over the past 18 months, her performance has noticeably declined. Missed deadlines, disorganized files, forgotten meetings. Her manager suspects a personal issue, but the employee deflects when asked. Colleagues have started picking up her slack and resentment is building. So HR conducts a performance review and determines the issues are documented and sustained. When the termination conversation happens, the employee breaks down and discloses that she's been caring for a spouse with early-onset Alzheimer's and hasn't slept more than 4 hours a night in a year. She says she didn't ask for help because she was afraid of losing her job. So this is a good meaty one for us to kind of get into. So as you've just sort of heard this whole thing, talk to me about before we actually just kind of jump to any conclusions about anything, what stands out to you here as what's most risky or most unclear in a scenario like this?
Yeah, so what jumps out to me is not just the performance issue, right? That scenario really talks about the sustained performance issues she's had over the past 18 months. That's not the thing that really jumps out to me. One of the things that jumps out to me is that there seems to be a failure on behalf of the company to provide psychological safety to this employee, right? So this is a long-term employee. She's been there 22 years, and not until we're in the termination conversation does she feel like she needs to speak up about these personal issues that are going on. And it also says that her manager suspects something's going on. So what kind of environment are we creating for our employees where they feel safe to bring these outside issues into work? And that's even before we even get to some of the legal things that this even brings up.
Yeah, I think you're putting it perfectly. It's how come it took, this person's been here for 22 years. You would think that there was some level of trust or psychological safety, maybe just because of time served. And they're also well liked. There's someone who, usually if someone's well liked, it means that they've got good relationships within the organization. So to hear that it isn't until termination conversations that this person shares more about what's been going on in their life, it does kind of flag what kind of environment, do you have there?
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to, with people, because it's always sort of, people never react the way that you think that they're going to, or they never react in the most clear, consistent way. So it's now you're kind of seeing, all right, we're in this conversation. What happens now? So if you were in this scenario, what's the first thing you'd want to understand?
Yeah. So what's the first thing I want to understand is really, what are those conversations that the manager had leading up to this termination? What was actually said? What did they ask? What were the responses? I'm looking for, as we saw performance start to decline, were we just going into conversations with this employee with the goal of, I want to bring these performance issues to their attention and get them to fix it? Or were we going into these conversations, figuring out what's the why behind the performance issues and asking lots of open-ended questions? What do those conversations look like? A lot of times we'll have managers that will check the box, right? They're used to working with HR people, and they know they need that documentation. They know that their HR person is going to ask, have you had any coaching conversations? Did you write them up? Did you have any performance reviews? So they know that's going to happen. And so sometimes managers go into these conversations trying to check the boxes that they think they know they have to have, and they forget the part of our job that's really important, and that is centering the human that they're dealing with. So what kind of conversations did we ask? What kind of questions did we ask? Were we really going into those conversations with positive intent? Or were we going into those conversations with the intent to get the right documentation so that we could terminate later? What did those conversations really look like that's the first thing I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's a really good call out, is like, are they using the documentation just to document for termination, or are they using the documentation to document for performance? There's a very, very fine line sometimes. And I'd also want to know, if they're documenting this stuff, does the employee know? Do they ever let her know that they're writing down all these issues that she's having? Did anyone ever even have a conversation with her, or was it just documenting until you're going to terminate?
Absolutely. That's why I want to know what they asked first.
Yeah, I think that's super smart. And so in trying to find this out, who do you want to hear from? Like, who are the people that you're talking to in this scenario?
Yeah, specifically, I want to hear from that person's direct manager first and foremost. One of my favorite questions to ask leaders that I support is, what part of this performance issue do you own? And so I want to hear from that person's manager, because I want to hear, one, their perspective on what the performance issues were. When did they first notice it? Was there anything going on around the time they were noticing it? And then I want to ask the manager that tough question about, what part of this do you own? And then another good question I like to ask managers before we even get to termination is the person going to be surprised by this? So I really want to see, is that manager kind of managing seagull style? Like, they come in, they give an assignment, they fly away, they don't have any interaction with the person until something goes wrong, and then they swoop back in, make a whole lot of noise, and this termination is what the gift they want to leave them before they fly back out. Like, are they that seagull manager, or are they really trying to be a people leader and care for the whole person, not just what that person gives to their team or the company? And then I also want to talk to that manager about bringing these types of issues to HR before it's a crisis situation, right? Like, okay, so you're bringing it to me now when she says that she has this caregiver situation, but when you were having these performance situations, why didn't you partner with HR before? What tools and resources could I have given you to try to fix this performance issue before we're letting go someone who's been with the company for 22 years? And really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to assess the gap in training for that manager first and foremost. I believe there are times when we terminate people because that person is really just not a good fit for that role or for the company environment. But I believe most of the time when we have performance issues in an organization, that is something that the leader or the organization is doing that's putting barriers or obstacles in the employee's way to actually getting their work done. And so I want to figure out where those gaps are so that I can provide training not just to this manager, but to the whole organization, so we don't have stuff like this happen in the future.
Yeah. That's an interesting take. It's just like, what are the managers doing to not intentionally sabotage sometimes, but just get in the way of employees being able to do good work in some cases, right? Yeah. Especially like, this office manager's been here for 22 years and there's only been an issue in the last 18 months. So clearly like something must have changed, right? That they were just able to be fine for whatever this is, 20 and a half years until now, or 21, right? Like, and now all of a sudden it's an issue. And I think like where it would have been interesting to intervene earlier, I think too, is it says that there's resentment now because other employees are picking up the slack. Like there should have been intervention before that got to that point, because now it's starting to bleed. It's starting to kind of impact other people too. Yeah. So what are some assumptions that you're being very careful to not make in this situation?
So I'm going to start this answer by talking about the assumption that I'm going to make. So there's two assumptions I'm going to make looking into this. One, it's one assumption, but it looks different for the two people. So one, I'm going to assume positive intent, and that is from the employee and the manager. And so I am going in looking with the assumption that this employee is not trying to create a burden on her peers and her coworkers. Again, she's been there 22 years, right? People loved her. She's been doing a great job up until 18 months ago. I'm going to go in assuming that she wasn't trying to stick it to her coworkers. And then on the supervisor side, I'm also going to go in with the assumption that they have positive intent, that there is work that they are trying to get done, and they use the tools that were at their disposal to try to get that work done. So I'm going in with those assumptions up front. What I'm not going in to assume is that I'm not going in assuming that this is just purely a performance issue and that we should just move forward with termination because the employee didn't disclose this up front. And I think a lot of times when this happens and somebody discloses something that might put them in a protected class at termination, sometimes it can be easy to say that we're assuming that the person is throwing this out now to protect their job. I'm not going in assuming that. I'm not going in assuming that there were not signs that she needed some type of help or support before we got to this point. I'm also not going in assuming that it is a cop-out, that she was afraid that she was going to lose her job if she disclosed this. Right? She's worked there 22 years. Again, it would be easy to assume that she should have good relationships and she should trust people that work for the organization, including her leader. But that does not mean that that is what's actually taking place day to day in her job. That fear that she's going to lose her job if she discloses that she's a caregiver is really, to me, a data point about what is the actual experience our employees are having in our organization and with our leaders. And that really, really matters. And I'm also not assuming either way I'm not assuming anything about this termination. I'm not assuming that we're going to move forward with it. And I'm not assuming that we're not going to move forward with it. Right now, we're going to pause and make sure that we gather all of the facts around this situation so that we do the best thing for everybody involved.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you're assuming that no one here wants to cause any issues, right? It's very rare that someone wakes up and is just like, you know what, today I'm going to be the worst coworker because that's just what I want to do. Like, it's rare that actually happens, especially someone who's been there for 22 years. And something you're talking about that I think is really worth kind of like just kind of building on too is power dynamics, because you can have good relationships with people after being well-liked for 22 years, but well-liked is sometimes a burden, because well-liked can sometimes mean you keep yourself in a position of likability and you're not advocating for yourself, or you're afraid of rocking the boat. And, it's one thing to be well-liked. It's another thing to feel safe in a situation where you might not be liked, if that makes sense, because there's a lot of stigma around caregivers in the workplace too, just externally, whether we like it or not. Plus, I'm sure it's even more stressful for her knowing that her husband's going through this. She's the caregiver. She can't lose her job. So it's like, it just builds. The whole thing builds.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes that HR teams might make in situations like this?
I think the biggest mistake that HR teams make in situations like this is, I'm going to say, first of all, using HR instead of our full title, right? So we talked about this a little bit. HR stands for human resources. And sometimes what HR teams can do is we stand behind we're the HR team and we check the boxes for compliance and make sure that we checked all of our little boxes and that we followed all of our little best practices, and we substitute those check boxes in compliance for the human part and really using our judgment. Yes, the documentation may be clean. Yes, we may have done all the reviews and we may have had the conversations, and the manager signed off on it. But did we stop and say, why is this happening to somebody that's been here for 22 years?
Yeah.
A 22-year employee now is having a sustained performance decline.
Something's wrong.
What did we miss?
Yeah.
What did we miss? Something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest mistake. We go, yep, we checked the box. Yep, we did a lot of companies have the discipline process where you do initial, second, final, and then termination. And we can just get into the groove and go, yep, we did an initial. Yep, we did a written. Oh, look, the manager even did an extra coaching conversation before they went to the final, and we still have this. Yeah, this is fine. But we're not fixing the root cause of the issue when we just treat it as a compliance issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's perfect. And it's true, because it's, if you're just following the process just to follow the process, it's just as bad as not having any process. Sometimes it's even worse, because you're trying to tip the scales consciously or unconsciously, like in a specific direction, right? I know some managers would prefer to just terminate someone justifiably, quote unquote, rather than have to do the messy work of figuring out what's up with this person. What do they need? Is it something we can provide? And how do we get them to feel comfortable sharing something important with us?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so there's a certain point where HR has to make a call, right? Like of some kind. So how do you, this isn't necessarily about making the call, but when you're trying to exercise your judgment, like what are the competing pressures here and how do you weigh them as you're navigating this?
Yeah. So definitely competing pressures. And we talked about this earlier, right? So we have the employee and her caregiver situation, right? She can't lose her job. She's taking care of a loved one right now. She's been at this place for 22 years. There's a lot of pressure there. And with how we handle that employee, that creates some risk just with how we handle that employee, with the employer brand and how we're recognized as an employer. So we have that piece. And then we have another piece where this performance issue has been going on for 18 months. And so now we've created pressure with the team. And yeah, she's been well liked for most of the time, but how is the team feeling? Are they starting to resent her? Are they resenting the leader? Are they more than happy to jump in and take more off of her plate with some guidance? What's going on with the team, and how can we not make the team's performance suffer? So we have that going on. And then we have the legal part of this, right? We're getting ready to terminate somebody, and now they've disclosed that there's some protected category here. And so how do we manage this legal piece here to make sure that we resolve the situation, but we're not just terminating somebody and denying them the rights to use some of the protections that are available for caregivers. So, and none of those are going to resolve neat and cleanly. And so really one of the things I like to do at this point is kind of start talking to the people involved and seeing how would they like to see this resolved. So I might pull the group of employees she worked with and say, hey, I heard that you guys are feeling a little bit of pressure. What's going on? What are you seeing? And hear what they say. Because sometimes talking to the team might already know that she is a caregiver, and that's why they've been stepping up without being asked to and being given some direct instructions on how to pick up some of that slack. So I'm going to talk to the team, and then one of the things I'm going to ask everybody is, how would you like to see this resolved? I'm pretty sure that the employee is going to say that she wants to take care of her husband and keep her job and not have these performance issues, the team is probably going to want to have work distributed fairly. But I'm going to ask them, how do you want to see the situation resolved? And then with the manager, I am going to be looking out when I ask them how do they want to see this resolved. I am looking out for them to take some ownership of the performance getting to this point and to hear from them some things in the resolution that they are going to do differently. And I'm also listening out to making sure that they haven't slipped into check the box compliance mode and they're not just telling me, well, I did all this work, so I want this person terminated. So I'm asking, how do you want to see this situation resolved? And then I'm going to take all of that into consideration as we work through and figure out what is the right direction to go.
Yeah, I think that I love that question too, because sometimes we don't have to figure out from scratch what's going on, right? I think sometimes, people in HR sometimes will hoard investigations or hoard cases and try to involve as little people as possible, which obviously you don't want more people than you need involved. But in situations like this, it does become something where it's like, let's talk about this. Like there's no cut and dry answer here. So instead of me just decreeing what's going to happen and setting it on you, like let's talk through what works for, what's the best situation that can come out of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so with whatever that decision turns out to be, who ultimately owns the outcome of it?
Yeah, so ultimately the company is going to own the outcome of it, ultimately.
Yeah.
If we're talking about who I like to say who has the D, who's the decision maker, ultimately where I like to sit is that the manager is going to be the decision maker. But I want to make sure that I'm involved and I'm giving the manager all the tools and all the information they need, as well as a mirror, right? Like, so going back to that, what part of this do you own, as well as a mirror, to make sure that we rectify the situation the correct way. And we don't have this information, right? We're talking through this right now. So we don't know what this outcome is going to be. We may go through all of this and talk to everybody and find out that this manager was amazing, right? Like they had the first conversation. Yeah. They thought something was off. They offered EAP. They asked those great questions that we want them to ask. And the right thing to do is termination. But we want the manager to own that decision because they own the performance of that employee and the experience of that employee. But we want to make sure that they know that we're their partner. We're going to hold a mirror to them and show them where they missed steps, but we're also going to give them all the information so that as they make that decision, they know that it's the right one for everyone involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think the manager is the one who owns it because ultimately, if they're the one who's letting this person go, then it needs to be clear that it's their call for maybe justifiable reasons, right? And if they're the person who decides to keep this person and maybe extend, a warning period or something, like maybe just give them a little bit more time to make it right. Now, knowing what we all know, that manager is responsible for making sure that that person is set up to succeed, whether it's an adjusted schedule or delegating some of their work to someone else. Like the manager is the one who owns that outcome either way. And yeah, it's kind of like, it's almost like you want to see a manager want to support an employee in a situation like this. And you just don't want to ever see it get to be this point before you finally get the chance to do that,
Yep.
Yeah. So are there things that HR can do that the HR leaders specifically can do to prepare managers for this kind of moment? Like when you kind of get a curveball from someone who you thought you knew when you're in sort of a contentious situation, like how can HR leaders prepare managers for situations like this?
I think the best way to prepare managers for situations like this is to practice it. So that's that training piece, right? Everybody I even hate them, right? I hate to go to a training class and you sit there and you listen to the facilitator teach and then they're like, all right, get up, we're going to do a role play, right? Like everybody hates role plays, but honestly, role playing is the best way to get that brain muscle memory of, oh, they said this, that's a trigger, and just to kick in those good questions automatically. You have to role play it. So training classes, role play. I'm in a manufacturing environment right now, and so doing gimbal walks with the leaders and asking those questions of the leaders as you're just walking around. I like to tell my leaders, I'm like, when we're walking the floor and I see something, and I like to say, okay, I'm going to ask the dumb question here. But just asking the dumb question that all the time, right?
Like all the time.
Like, hey, even if it's something simple, right? Like I'm walking on the floor and there's a cord across the floor. I'm going to ask the manager that I'm working with, hey, what's the purpose of that cord across the floor? Because it's something they probably walked past a million times and not thought about it until the person trips over it, right?
Someone gets hurt. Yep. You get a new hire who doesn't know it's there. Someone who's not used to being in the environment. They just trip over.
And so you have
to
do that training and those gimbal walks and that role play with the managers, so that they don't get blindness, but they also get that muscle memory to say, oh, when I hear this, this is what I need to do. Or if they hear something that maybe it doesn't trigger them to say something you trained them on, but it might hit real close and they'll go, oh, I need to go talk to HR about this because I don't have a tool to deal with this. So role playing and training is very, very important for managers.
Yes, I completely agree. And it has to go beyond just the classroom stuff. Like you said, it has to be the practice. It's the muscle memory, because that way you're more likely to respond correctly in stressful situations when you're not trying to figure out what to say or do. Your muscle memory starts to kick in. Yeah. So I've got one final closing question for you since we're wrapping up. So this podcast, we like to talk about different things that, HR can, sort of learn. It's about the nuances. It's about the gray. And we're also kind of trying to show just how difficult the job is and sort of what, there's no such thing as black and white in HR. And so what is one assumption about HR that you think needs to be challenged? Assumption maybe from people outside of our business and or outside of our industry.
Yeah, I think one assumption about HR that needs to be challenged is what we talked about earlier, that just following the process protects you. Just following the process just following the process doesn't protect you. It doesn't protect the company. It doesn't protect everyone involved. And we need to have processes, right? We need to have processes because processes let us know when something starts to go off the rail, but that is not enough. We have to make sure everything's done right, process-wise, procedurally, but we have to really make sure that we are putting back on our judgment and putting the human back into human resources. I love that some companies are moving away from even using human resources and calling people leaders, because we need to put the people back into what we do. And you can't proceduralize that. You have to, I think Ken Blanchard says it best in his situational leadership 2 training. He says that you have to manage different people differently in different situations. And while you may have a tool bag of things of procedures that you're going to use to help you do that, you have to consider that every person is different, every situation is different, and that you're going to probably have to use a different tool each and every time. And that can still be fairness and consistency.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that here. Because there's so much, I don't know, I think you brought so much wisdom to this conversation and just kept it really, really real, because the thing that you talked about so much is just how the human part of it is the hard part, but it's like the only part that really matters. Like you can systemize so many things, but if you're not using it effectively, or if you're not putting, people into the right situations that help them thrive, you're not HR, you're not doing your job. You're not human resources. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Dayna, for being here. Thank you everybody for listening. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Bye.